This is a heck of a deer.
Giant Eurasian brown bear in Croatia right here.
When I set out to do the sheep slam with the muzzleloader, I had no idea what it was going to take.
Hey everybody, have a special guest on today, Joel Strickland from Lost Bridge Duck Club, and Joel also has his channel Surviving Duck Season. If you haven't checked that out, make sure to check that out on YouTube, also social media. Today we're going to cover the property at Lost Bridge, and the big one, they're coming close to having the lodge completed down there. It's 12,500 square feet, going to be gorgeous. Looking forward to finding out more. Well, Joel, happy to have you back today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Good, good. Well, I want to spend a ton of time on the property and the lodge at Lost Bridge because I know at least the lodge is getting darn close and sounds like it's going to be ready for this fall. But before we do, let's talk about last season, how to end up, what it looked like from beginning to end.
Sure. Well, so a lot of the country had extremely unusual late fall and winter, going from 24 into 25. It was no different here. It was very warm in late November and December, which is the first part of our duck season. We typically open up the weekend before Thanksgiving. It was really warm, is in the 70s, even 80-ish, a lot of days in that time frame. And so it was slow. We didn't have much of a migration. We had some early birds right before duck season came in, and we had a big flood on the White River, and it flooded out our property. So that helped us out with not having to pump as much, but it also spread the ducks out a lot early, right at the beginning of duck season. And so it wasn't quite what everybody wanted it to be for the early part of the season statewide. We kind of struggled like everybody else did. But once we got past Christmas, started having cooler weather up north, the birds started moving south, and we had a really, really good January. And so we had, I don't know, probably 12 days in a row that we hunted one blind because everything was froze up, and we whacked them every day in there. It was a lot of fun. Guys just, had a great time with us.
Awesome. So you mentioned something there. What's the population of I call local birds or early birds usually in Arkansas before the flights start really coming down?
Gosh, I really don't know what the early counts are. I'm trying to remember when they actually start counting in Arkansas. I think it's really more into mid-December before they count. I could be wrong about that, but we always like to have water by about the 20th of October, even though our season doesn't usually open for a whole month later, because we get a early season push that has really nothing to do with weather. That's just what we call calendar birds that show up between the 20th and the 25th of October. A lot of guys call them Halloween birds because they show up before Halloween. And so that's what we always do is we've tried to have a sizable amount of acreage with water on it ready for the ducks to show up. And then from then until really mid-December, and we don't really see a lot of new birds until we start getting weather up north to push them south. And so we really want to hold as many birds in our area as we can early. And so we had thousands and thousands of birds on the place, probably the first week of November, which is still a few weeks before the season opened. And that's not unusual for that to happen.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of the pictures and the videos of all the ducks spread all over the water. Definitely something to see compared to what we see up here in Michigan. On the ducks versus geese, how did you guys do on geese last year?
Geese were a little slower. When we started finally having the birds start using the areas that we could hunt, then we all of a sudden got major weather, freezing, and and we're talking about speckle belly geese is what we're talking about for us. And they moved out. Literally, we had three or four pretty good hunts, and then we had all the freezing weather, and they moved out, which is not unusual. And then they came back right at the end of the duck season when it started warming back up.
Mm-hmm. The old chess game of waterfowl hunting every year,
Yeah.
depending on what the weather does. But speaking of weather, again, before we dive into the lodge and property, you guys have had a heck of a spring with water down there. How high did it get on the flood gauge?
So the gauge at Augusta, which is the closest one on the White River next to our property, and our property has about 2.5 miles of White River frontage,
Hmm.
and so it was about 37 and a couple of inches. So that's the flood stage is 26 feet. So that's 12 feet, 11
Hmm.
feet, over flood stage. And that's pretty significant. That doesn't happen every year. We get floods mostly every year.
Hmm.
I've done a deep dive on the last 100 years of floods on the White River in our area just to see what's normal. And 37 feet is not an every year deal. Typically, it's 33 feet is kind of the normal high for the year that happens February, March kind of
Hmm.
thing. And then uh, a lot of times it'll go into the later spring before it completely recedes. But this year was an anomaly. It's probably about every 10 to 15 years you get a pretty good flood like that. Highest we've ever had on record has been 41 feet.
Okay. Now, you say 41 feet, which I'm going to jump around a little bit. What's the lodge being built at?
So we built up a lot
Hmm.
where the pad is, where the lodge is being built. It should be about 42 and a half or 43 feet, I believe, is where we're
Okay.
set. So we're better than it was in 19 whatever, I think 38 or 41 or something like that when it was the highest that it's ever been. There was another one that was just shy of that in 2011. And
Okay.
so it just that's very unusual. When it gets, close to 40, that just doesn't hardly ever happen. That's a couple times really
Yeah.
in the last 100 years.
And for anybody I mean, hasn't built in Arkansas or hasn't been to Arkansas, it's a unique build process. And you mentioned build up. You literally have to build the ground up because it almost always gets wet around it. I'm hoping we have some pictures that we can put in here what the water looked like around the lodge and so forth. But at the same token, that water is what makes Arkansas Arkansas for duck hunting later in the year. So that
Yeah.
part. Um, what does it mean for the property getting this much water early? And you mentioned it floods almost every year.
Yeah.
What does that water mean to the property?
Well, I'm cool with there being a flood early. It completely this year it completely inundated. Um 80% of what we had. The lodge definitely wasn't in jeopardy. Even if we hadn't built it up, it probably wouldn't have been in jeopardy
Hmm.
this year. But as far as all of our timber that we have, all of the open ground stuff that we have, all of our impoundments, everything was feet. I mean, like over your head, 7, 8, 9 feet in some places
Hmm.
over your head, and that's a lot. I don't like for it to get that bad because then you start having issues with messing up your levees and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Even as well as they're built, you still sometimes have to go back and do some repairs and things like that, and roads and stuff, put more gravel on them. But as far as the habitat goes, having inundation is part of the normal ecosystem in the White River, area. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, we like for it to just kind of come up and go back down, a
Hmm.
little drink and bringing in some silt and things like that on the ground is not necessarily a bad thing if you just don't have too much of it. I would prefer for it to just, like I say, come up and come down. That way we can do all the things that we want to do habitat wise. We're set up for being mostly natural anyway,
Hmm.
but we have water control structures that allow us to drain water off of our impoundments that we simply can't do that when the river gets that high.
Yeah. How long will this one take for it to go back down?
Well, I talked with the Corps of Engineers a couple of days ago, and their plan currently, and let me back up. The reason why the Corps of Engineers is important to know, we have a lot of reservoirs along the White River from Missouri all the way to us. There's several of them, and so they're controlling the levels in the lakes to prevent the dams, from getting too, for the
Hmm.
water getting too high and having structural problems. They do some generating for power on those areas, and then also just being able to be prudent to not flood out homes up
Hmm.
there. And then they've got to, balance the whole thing with the river, what it's doing to farm ground downriver. and all of that sort of thing. So they've got a big job to do. So
Hmm.
I reached out to the Corps of Engineers, and they say this year the plan is to hold the river at about 30 feet for the next month,
Okay.
sometime into May, and it'll then they'll start dropping it as long as we have normal rainfall and not excessive rainfall from this point forward. So far, it looks like we're may even be a little bit below normal the next
Hmm.
couple of weeks, which would be great. We'd love for it to get down below 28 feet. It's a little more manageable for us to do the habitat work that we want to do. And so that's where that is.
Okay. Um, Now, early season rains like this, the real question, good or bad for ducks?
It probably is not bad for ducks for us.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, maybe for surrounding farms that aren't able to plant because there's I couldn't even guess how many, 100,000, hundreds of thousands of acres all along the river that is typically farm ground that they can't plant it. And
Hmm.
so, that will definitely impact, the wildlife as well as, of course, the economy and the farming and all that. It's not unusual. So, I mean, it's not greatly unusual to have some flooding in the spring when farmers are trying to plant crops. But if it persists, into the summer, that's when we start getting nervous about what's that going to mean for the habitat for the winter.
Hmm. On habitat, well, let's start at the beginning of the property. What you've done to it to date, and then also what does your normal spring summer look like as far as planning and getting the property ready? And you everybody that's listening or watching, you hear me mention property a lot. We There's a property that Lost Bridge owns. It's a couple thousand acres, but then you guys lease thousands of acres around there too. But that's stuff that you can't hands-on manage, like the property that's along the White River and so forth. So anybody that's listening or watching, it's not just a couple thousand acres that you guys are on. It's way more than that, but it's a couple thousand acres that you manage specifically for ducks.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So we got on the property. I guess it's been over 2 years ago
Mm-hmm.
now. The property part of it had been enrolled in WRE, which is a wetland easement. And so it's a government program that allows us to, partner with the NRCS to build impoundments and to plant a lot of trees because about 900 acres of our property was a working farm previously. And just, basically for the reasons we've been talking about here the last several minutes about flooding,
Mm-hmm.
they just finally decided they're going to bail on the farming deal because it's just too difficult to grow a crop consistently, and then having to repair and do all the things they need to do. So we now have a property that is, again, all natural as much as possible. Once the structures have been put in, we keep it in. All of the impoundments are keeping the land into perpetual moist soil habitat.
Mm-hmm.
That's the choice that we've made to do. It will benefit the waterfowl the most to do it that way. And then we have the balance of the property that's on that 900 acres it was planted in trees. So it's probably 70% planted in hardwoods and cypress and oaks and that sort of thing. And then the rest of it that are impounded, there's lots of little 15-acre and 20-acre impoundments throughout the property that will have moist soil habitat, which is really where the main food source is. And so what we've been doing over the last couple of years, beginning when we first got on the property, we started assessing what do the impoundments look like? What does the infrastructure look like as far as the road systems, the water holding, whether it's the structures on the impoundments like the water control structures, whether it's our pumping situation to get water from the relift pump to the different areas, and then also fixing levees and roads that had eroded and even a massive levee that's on a creek that runs through the middle of our property. And so we addressed a lot of those things right off the bat
Mm-hmm.
so that we could control as much as we can control. I mean, you get a 35, 36 foot river and greater, there's not a lot to control, but that doesn't happen very often. So what we wanted to do is the most normal thing that we see from flooding, how can we protect the land from that as much as
Mhm.
possible so we can control what we want to happen as far as the desirable plants to grow, and then if we do any food plots, then being able to plant those and not be worried about river coming in and that sort of thing. So that's really was the first year's main deal is working on the infrastructure and building levees, fixing levees, and then putting in some pipes to drain places that we wanted to drain, all of that. And so we spent a lot of time and quite a bit of money doing that. And it really was a great success. Even the first year, it was a complete game changer for what we were able to do, start and work on in the spring. And then this past year, we did more of it. We identified, okay, we got that stuff done, but what were some of the problems that we saw, both from access during hunting season and being able to get into some areas to do some earlier habitat work that you do yearly. It's not just, you don't just set it and let it go. You
Mhm.
still have to actively manage those things. And so we worked on an additional road that was built up that acted also as a levee to help us be able to get to a part of the property to work on. And those things were very successful, enabled us to do some things. But then, unfortunately, the river got so high this year, we weren't able to take advantage of getting in to do anything early on the property. But once the water recedes, we'll take a look and see if there was any damage, repair what damage was done, and then think hopefully we won't have any of those same issues next year.
Yeah.
And then we can get in and do the early things. But like I said before, it doesn't bother me that we're going to have water late. I wish we didn't, but it doesn't mean that we won't have good habitat because this sort of thing has been happening for at least 100 years as far as recorded history goes. It's probably been happening a lot time before that.
Yeah.
And so, that's, it's intelligent design, is what I like to say. God designed this way,
Mhm.
and so this stuff isn't a surprise to him, and it's not a surprise to the environment that these things happen. And so we as man want to control everything,
Yeah.
but nature takes care of itself. And so there's going to be a lot of food. There's still going to be the cover and those sorts of things. And once the water does get out, we'll be able to continue moving forward. We just do things differently because of the different timing.
You had mentioned moist soil habitat. Explain what moist soil habitat is and why that makes Arkansas so special and what it means for ducks too.
So moist soil habitat is is a seasonal wetland. Okay, and so what that means is, or at least for our practical purposes, the seasonal wetland happens from when water gets put on it, which we do typically in September. We begin putting some water on it, and then the majority of the water happens at the end of fall and the beginning of winter, which is around Thanksgiving and on into December. We typically put the majority of the water on the habitat. And so the habitat is flooded from that time of the year, late part of the year, all the way into the spring and early summer, depending upon when we remove the water, we de-water the area. And so, that's however many months that is. I mean, it could be 6, 8 months long. And so seasonally it's wet that long. It if you as you can imagine, when water sits on a shallow area, and we're called, what I call shallow is, you know, uh, 3 feet and less. Some of it does have a little bit deeper areas, but for the
Mhm.
most part, it's 3 feet or less. And actually, the majority of that property, we keep water at about 18 inches deep. And so that's, with a few little deep channels, but the majority of our impoundments are about 18 inches deep, which is about the perfect feeding depth for a mallard duck.
Mhm.
Okay, and so that's typically what we see is the areas having about 6 to 8 months worth of water on it, and then you start slowly dropping the water until you're completely dried out. Normally in July or August, so fully dried, it's August and then we start putting some water in a few areas in September, but the majority of the impoundments are going to be dry in August, September, and October, and the first part of November. And so if you can see that, why is it called moist soil? Because the soil has got some type of moisture in it, even all the way throughout most of the year, and there's a certain type of grasses and sedges and forbs, that like to thrive in that environment.
Hmm.
And that's the things that we go after when we a lot of people that don't understand what you have to do to perpetuate moist soil. You've got to dewater it, number
Hmm.
one. It can't stay flooded all the time. Number two is, you've got to have water on there long enough for it to do its thing, and then drawing it off slowly. If you were to pull the plug, pull all of the water, all the boards out of the water control structures, and all the water rushes out of it in a matter of a week or so,
Hmm.
that's not what you're looking for, because it quickly dries out the property. And then when it dries really, really fast, then it's no different than if it's just regular, property that would just be laid fallow.
Hmm.
And so if you have some moisture content in the ground, then you get the sprinkle top, the tooth cup, the smartweed, barnyard grass, those things that have lots and lots of food for waterfowl. If you just drain it really, really quickly, then what happens is you start getting things you don't want to grow that are like cocklebur. Everybody knows what cockleburs are. They're,
Yeah.
they're a nuisance, and they really don't provide a lot of value for wildlife. And that those take over really, really quickly, and as well as other, what I call bad weeds.
Hmm.
A lot of people call all weeds are bad to farmers, but
Yeah.
for me, there's good weeds and there's bad weeds.
So, what have you planted specifically in the areas that you flood over the years, and which ones do you have to plant every year, and which ones do you plant one time and don't have to come back for a couple of years?
Yeah. So we plant millet is always what I like to call my backup plan.
Hmm.
If we have a bad response to our soil manipulation during the year to for the moist soil habitat, I can go in and disc a small area up and plant millet in late August.
Hmm.
And that works really, really well. It doesn't always have to be a backup plan. It could be your main plan, but that's
Hmm.
a good one. Ducks really, really like it, but they also feed it out really quickly.
Hmm.
And so that's always something to think about. The more diversity of plants you have on where you're doing a food plot or whatever, it's better for the waterfowl because they don't tend to eat it out so fast,
Yep.
especially something little like a millet plant. But that's one that I regularly plant just about every year. We also have planted milo, which is similar to a corn. It's probably about 4 feet tall, has a big head on it, about, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches, and has a lot of seed on it.
Hmm.
It does pretty good. It does especially well in our environments because you can plant it late. It's very drought tolerant. It's not seeming to be bothered as much by insects. And so it's an easier one to do, but it isn't one of my favorites, but I do plant it sometimes. That's one. Corn is definitely a great one to plant in the right places.
Hmm.
It doesn't like wet feet, so you don't want to plant it in lowland areas that might flood, and it's expensive to do.
Yep.
But the benefits at the end of the day, when you get to the winter, it's huge. And
Yeah.
so you got to be a farmer really to
Hmm.
plant that stuff. And we're actually going to be planting some of that on one of our leased areas this year. So I'm very excited about trying that out over there because I think it's going to do very well for us. And then rice is another big one. That one is very conducive to the type of property that we have at Lost Bridge Duck Club because again, it's moist. There's a lot of water. It could be flooded. We could get a lot of rain, and the ground holds the water. The type of soil certainly dictates the what you can plant.
Hmm.
And Arkansas has got a lot of clay in the soil, which is why we can hold water. We can flood up a field either in the farming season or in the wintertime, and it'll hold water because we've got, a shallow base, not very deep underground that will hold water, and it doesn't just leach through the ground. And so that's why, really what we call the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, which is, the southern part of Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana are great places for waterfowl, and farming rice is really, really great. I mean, Arkansas is the rice capital of the world. We farm tons and tons of rice that we export and all over the world. And it is, I wouldn't say it's easy to farm, but it can be something that you just plant it and let it go. It doesn't always work out fantastic that way, but you can do that. We are a little bit more hands-on with what we do, but we don't go fully to the extent that an agricultural farming practice would do. And we've had good success planting rice the last couple of years on the place.
Gotcha. On when It's funny when I ask people what they think hunting Arkansas, what they envision in their head, right? Everybody envisions in the timber, tucked up against a tree, and mallards coming in about 12 yards away from you. I know on the property we've got some areas that you flood for ducks in the timber. Explain how you do that, but really explain for everybody. It's not every day that the ducks are in there. When do the ducks really go in that timber?
I wish I knew the answer to that.
You're the duck whisperer. You're supposed to know everything.
It's. I think the answer to that isn't just when are the ducks in the timber, when are the ducks in any place. And I think what it comes down to as a land manager or just as a general duck hunter that either has leased ground or is going to public hunting is to know, what the ducks are doing by scouting and history, as far as your history with the property, tells a lot. Because what I've found over, I've been duck hunting like 40 years just about, and I'm a researcher. I take notes and remember things, and I think that's really important to do to be really successful with a lot of things in life.
Yeah.
And so what have found is that ducks come to certain places at certain times of the year based on when they're there. We always talk about, well, my ducks,
Yep.
show up at this place at this time. And so I've known over the years, if we have multiple farms that we might have leased or have owned for different clubs that I've been at, we know that at this club, they're there the first couple of weeks of the season. But then it's kind of hit and miss the rest of the year, but they're at this place at this time of the year. And so when we talk about timber, it really kind of depends on the location that you're at when they're really there. And so we're still trying to learn some of it. We do know some of it on, some of our places that we have, whether it be leased or our own ground, we've got timber, both leased and owned. And so we know that, some of them have earlier ducks arriving and some of them are later. And I think a lot of it has to do with when the river floods, then there are more ducks generally in our area. And so they're going to be spread out all over everything that's flooded, including the woods. So what we've been doing over the last couple of years is trying to imprint them more and more on all of our property, including the timber. But as far as just in general, and I think I know kind of what you're talking about when you say, they're not always in the woods. You might have ducks using your woods for the last couple of weeks, and maybe they always use it, say in mid-December. But the best time to go hunting in the woods is a sunny day. You want sunny days. Even the wind is really doesn't matter quite so much in the woods, except you don't want high wind days because sometimes that makes it a little bit more difficult for them to navigate into a small hole into the woods. But normally we like to have a decent breeze and clear skies. They typically don't want to use the woods as much on a cloudy day. Rainy days even less. And the clouds do two things. Number one, it makes it a lot more difficult to hide. If we're not in a blind, we're standing next to a tree, you stick out like a sore thumb on a cloudy day. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't like to go in the woods on cloudy days. But also just in general, a sunny day, they just it's I don't know what it is about it. It's just it's a magnet spot for them. They get in there, especially in later morning, because the sun is, beaming down and there's lots of shadows. And I think maybe the ducks just want to go in there and loaf
Yep.
and get in the shade.
You mentioned a key word, imprint. Explain what you mean when you say a duck imprints in an area year after year and why that's so important.
Yeah. So imprinting is a duck coming back to a place year after year. Basically, they learn that a place is there
Hmm.
and they want to use it for some reason, whether it's food or shelter. They're
Hmm.
getting away from hunters, they're getting away from predators, whatever the habitat looks like. There's a reason that they're going there, and we want to imprint them. So our property, up until about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, would only be flooded when the river comes up.
Hmm.
Okay. So if there was a year that there was no flooding, which happens occasionally, then the ducks would never have a reason to go there because it's dry. In Arkansas and Mississippi, Louisiana typically do not see a lot of dry feeding ducks like they do up in the upper Midwest.
Hmm.
And so if it's dry, they're going to go to where there's water. And so because the previous landowner wasn't a big waterfowler, they didn't have any impoundments, they didn't have areas that they fixed up for ducks.
Hmm.
So what we've done in having all of the impoundments and improving and even adding more, we're creating more habitat and more places for water to be so the ducks will stop along the way. So we are imprinting the ducks to find us, to remember we're there. We hold water later in the year. A lot of farmers want to drain their water
Hmm.
as soon as duck season is out, and you definitely want to do that on your timber areas, but you don't want to do that on the areas that I mean, you don't you want to drain it off the trees because you don't want to kill your trees. But when
Hmm.
you have areas that is moist soil habitat and that sort of thing, we like to hold the water as long as possible. So where are we at now? The end of April is when we're
Hmm.
recording this podcast, and I had ducks. I mean, I saw ducks last week.
Yeah.
I saw thousands of ducks like 2 or 3 weeks ago,
Uh-huh.
you know, and so that's a great thing to imprint those ducks, even though they may be late ducks that have been in Louisiana and they're slowing them, work back through,
Uh-huh.
just letting them know that we're here. We do some things. We'll even, put out some corn in some places in February just to
Hmm.
kind of beef up the food
Yep.
so that they can imprint. And that's a very common practice that some clubs do in Arkansas and other states I know,
Uh-huh.
because they want to imprint the birds. I mean, once duck season closes in Arkansas, there's no more duck season,
Yep. Yep.
anywhere in the country. And so, we'd like for them to stick around for a little while until they go back north.
Stay as long as they can. So on
Mhm.
the property also, you have areas set up that you don't hunt during the season, just to as an area for birds to be able to collect, get no pressure throughout the season, and just kind of stay there. To explain the process of those areas that you get set up.
Sure. So on all of the farms that we either own or lease, we have rest areas set aside, and that those are places that we have very intentionally chosen because you don't normally drive by them. You don't have to go past them on a way to a duck blind. And you've really got to be going there to get there. They're protected as much as they possibly can be. So that's number one. Number two, you need to have a sizable amount of area so that the ducks can have a place to rest, not get shot at. And because, I think the biggest mover of ducks is a shotgun, and people disturbing ducks. And so, in order for us to have ducks around us, we need to have places that they're not getting shot at. It seems like every, uh, small piece of water in Arkansas has
Hmm.
got a duck blind sitting on it, and you just really need to have a lot of rest areas to keep them. We definitely have some sanctuary ground, which is federal and state owned properties that is sanctuary ground that you're not allowed to even set foot on. And I think some of that is good. I might argue that there might be a little bit too much of that, but at any rate, I think it's better to have a lot of small areas. And when I call small, I'm talking 50 to 100 acres,
Uh-huh.
being small.
Yep.
Have some smaller areas that can be rest areas that are very protected from people being able to disturb them in any way. And we don't go in there. I mean, a lot, it used to be back, I'd say 20, 25 years ago, a lot of clubs would have a rest area, but what they did with the rest area is they still manipulated the ducks. They go,
Hmm.
drive through it or drive a little too close to it. And I mean, technically, you're not supposed to manipulate ducks by just pushing them. But I think that was the thought process is that, well, if I can hold 10,000 ducks in this field, and then if we're having a slow morning, we'll just kind of take a little
Yeah.
drive and get them up and they'll fly around a little bit. And I think we've learned as managers that that's not a good thing to do. I
Yeah.
mean, back in the day when you didn't have nearly as many people and you had a lot more property that held water, maybe that was okay, but today it's not okay. We have less and less habitat than we did, more and more people hunting the less and less property, and
Hmm.
so we just got to do something to keep the birds, give them a place to rest and not be stressed out all the time.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned this is along the White River, pretty close to Augusta. Explain the history of waterfowl hunting along the White River. There's also some pretty, I mean, famous clubs that are a stone's throw away. Explain the reason why this area in Arkansas is just, I guess you could say, famous for waterfowl hunting.
Yeah. So the White River and the Cache River and the Langell River and the Black River, those are several uh, pretty popular, from hunting standpoint, pretty popular places to go. Stuttgart, of course, they've always branded themselves as the rice and duck hunting capital of the world.
Hmm.
And yes, there's a lot of great duck hunting down there. But this part, we're further north. We're like an hour and 20 minutes north, I guess, of there. And the White River and the Cache River, especially, which are the closer rivers to us, has really kind of been thought of as the ancestral wintering grounds of waterfowl. It's when the ducks move south out of you look at the maps that they've made about the different flyways and that sort of thing of duck hunting over the years. It's an hourglass looking thing from getting from even from the Pacific flyway and the Atlantic flyway. Ducks will fly even across flyways into the Mississippi flyway to fly south a lot of times. They don't all do that, but a lot of them do.
Hmm.
And then they know that because of banding data, and that happens year after year after year. Again, imprinting, that's where
Hmm.
we learn about imprinting, and because you know that those same ducks are going to the same places year in and year out. And so Arkansas is where the funnel really necks down, and then it goes down into Louisiana, and so this area just right here around Augusta, you can mention the name Augusta to a duck hunter, and it's kind of like mentioning Augusta to a golfer.
Yeah, yeah.
People know what that is, or they've at least heard of it if haven't come and hunted the area before. This the White River is very, very large. Right here, it's I don't know, probably I don't know, half a mile across or maybe more than that. I don't know. And that's where it really starts being big all the way down to where it joins the Arkansas River much
Hmm.
further south. And so there's a lot of habitat, there's a lot of farming, that brings the ducks in for feeding, as well as a lot of bottomland hardwoods. There's a very large the Hurricane Lake Management Area is just right across the road from our property.
Hmm.
It's I don't know, like 20,000 acres ish,
Big. Yeah.
and that's got a lot of flooded timber. And then there's many others in the area. The Cache River is just east of us. There's a lot of habitat in there. And so when the White River and the Cache River flood out, this is where the ducks will actually fly from Tennessee, Mississippi, even Louisiana when we get a big flood, because that's where they want to be. It's just hundreds of thousands of acres of flooded area. There's lots of habitat, and this is where they come, the old ancestral wintering grounds. And so across the road, there's a couple of really good clubs. Across the river from us is a famous club, just probably I don't know, 10, 12 miles. There's two or three big clubs that,
Hmm.
most everybody is, at least around here, have heard of in Arkansas. And it's because this area is so good.
Hmm.
And I think we, especially the big clubs, are helping to keep more birds in the area because we want birds early, even when there's not much water in the White River, even when there's not much water in some of the public hunting areas. There are still ducks in the area because the private landowners and the clubs are doing what they can to provide habitat for ducks not to just blow on past us.
Hmm. On this, I had jotted down some notes of questions I wanted to ask you. The one I think will blow people away. How many blinds do you have on the property?
Um, Currently, I believe we have about 30.
Hmm.
I'm going to be adding at least another 10 or 12.
For this coming
And
season for
for this coming
2025. Yep.
season, yeah,
Yep.
over the next 3 or 4 months, we'll be building in some more. And you know, I I've never been a big blind guy
Hmm.
until the last 10 years. You start carrying a lot of duck hunters, especially that don't have a lot of experience duck hunting. You just have to have a
Get them in
blind
somewhere.
for
Yep.
not only be to be hidden, but also to be comfortable.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I feel like we do a really good job with making, very comfortable and concealed blinds. But when you have a lot of open ground and we have, a lot of open ground with all the different properties we have,
Hmm.
you can't just sit out in the open
Yeah.
and pull up a makeshift blind and that sort of thing. And so we have like I said, we have a lot of blinds, but a lot of them are portable-ish.
Yep.
You could pull them with a side by side or a tractor and get them to a different area. We're still trying to dial in exact locations on some places.
Hmm.
Some of them we have dialed in pretty
Yeah.
good. And we don't overhunt the spots. I mean, I wish we had, 400 acres and could hunt the same three blinds every day. I
Every
mean, that'd
single.
be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
It
Get
used to
everything
be like
dialed in.
that.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, but it used to be like you could hunt like that, but it hasn't been like that in a long time. I think you have to have a diversity of habitat and be able to rest your places. And so, I think earlier I mentioned that we had a place that we hunted the same spot like I don't know, 10 or 12 days in a row. And it wasn't because that's my normal practice by any means. And normally I would hunt that place one day and let it
Hmm.
rest 3 or 4 days and come back and hunt it again. But everything was frozen. And we didn't do the typical get out before daylight. We hunted in the, from like 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock.
Okay.
And that's just because you're going with the time. Everything's frozen. The high is 28 degrees today. It's not
Yeah.
going to thaw out. And and so that's what we do, around here. And a lot of people don't even think about going out in the midday. That
Yeah.
but that it works. It works really, really well. And so we did that day in and day out. We didn't beat the birds up, as far as, running things off because they're roosting somewhere on
Yep.
some big water somewhere, and
Yep.
then they got to feed somewhere, and there's not a lot of options.
Hmm.
So, but normally we don't hunt a place 2 days in a row. Very rarely do I hunt a place 2 days in a row. We
Yeah.
we move around and give it a lot of rest, and so that's why you got to have a lot of blinds so you can rest as much as possible.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's dig into the fun stuff that I really wanted to talk about today, the lodge.
Okay.
And the beauty, if you guys are just listening to this, you got to check out on the YouTube channel because we're going to tie in some videos and some pictures of what the lodge is. Joel, just take it. Explain how big the lodge is, where the process is now, what it's taken to get to this.
Sure. So we began working on what's the lodge need to look like. Immediately when we bought the property, we started trying to decide where we're going to build the lodge because there wasn't necessarily an obvious spot that this is where it's got to be. Sometimes when you get property, this is where the lodge has to be. We had a lot of options. We had a lot of land. There's a couple of hundred acres that are the higher ground part of the property, and it really could have gone about anywhere in there. And so the first thing we did was try to decide where we wanted to do it, and then while we were in that process, we were also trying to decide what's this lodge need to look like. What type of a business model are we going with the lodge? How big does it need to be? How many people are we trying to hunt? every day, and then be able to house them and that sort of thing. And so what we came up with after probably 6 or 8 months of working through that is we decided to build a lodge that would have 14 guest bedrooms. We normally would hunt about 12 people a day. And occasionally we might hunt a few more, but for the most part, that's the plan, is to hunt 12 people a day.
Hmm.
And they are all single occupancy rooms. In the years that I've worked in the business of guided hunts, I've made mental notes and taken a lot of written notes as to what do people like.
Hmm.
I've traveled all across the world as well, doing lots of waterfowl hunting as well as other types of hunting. And so I also like, well, what do I like? What do I not like? I've
Hmm.
worked in some other lodges before. What did I like about the lodge? What was a good workflow for managing a lodge? So we took all those things, my wife included, because she's been involved in the same as well. And so then we started kind of dialing in what do we want to have in the lodge, talking about the different kinds of amenities, the rooms we would have, how big they are, but single occupancy with their own bathroom is really what most people want to have. I know a lot of guys say, well, I don't care what the lodge is like. I just need a bed, something that's halfway clean, and I'm good to go. All I care about is ducks.
Yep.
I just want to kill ducks. And I get it. I
Yep.
want to shoot ducks too. I think
Yep.
we all do. But at the end of the day, I can't control a wild animal.
Hmm.
I can't control the migration. I can't control what the weather is going to be. And I can't make a duck do as much as we are, as good as I think I am at duck hunting, and as much as I think I know about duck hunting, I still don't know. I feel like I don't know anything,
Hmm.
some days when you go duck hunting. And so what we want to do is we want to make the entire experience for a hunter to be as best as it can be. And so controlling the controllables.
Yep.
And that means having a good, clean lodge, having, proper duck blinds and having all your stuff together, have good equipment, all those
Hmm.
things are very, very important. And I think having a lodge that can be comfortable and nice and enjoyable, place to hang out with your buddies, hang
Hmm.
out with the guys that you don't know, get to know them, having a place to have a really nice meal and just be able to go home and talk about the entire experience.
Yep.
Man, we had a great hunt. But man, you wouldn't believe this thing that they do at the lodge, or
Hmm.
the great room is so cool, or the meals were incredible.
Yep.
All of those things are memorable. And yeah, you talk about the banded duck that got shot, or you talk about the big wad of mallards that dropped in the timber, but you
Hmm.
also talk about the meal. That's the greatest meal I've ever had. I've heard that a bunch of times in
Yep.
my life, and that's things that people talk about as well. And so that's why we take such attention to designing the lodge. So it's about 12,500 square feet is what we've arrived at.
Hmm.
It's much too big to be all on one level.
Yep. Yep.
So it's got upstairs bedrooms and then a large gathering room upstairs, and then the great room is downstairs. It's got a beautiful giant stone fireplace, and then big windows looking out the back. There's be a lake built. Part of it's done, and the rest of it will be done sometime later this year. And so that'll be very nice to see out the back of the lodge. I've just signed a deal with the guy to build an incredible river table. If you know what a river table is,
I
Mark, but
don't. What is a river
yeah.
table?
So a river table is a slab, with a rough edge, like a live edge,
Okay.
and so you can do it with lots of different types of trees. So, it's going to be, 2.5 inches thick with a live edge. And so what they do is they cut a slab, and to make it wide enough, you got to use two slabs. And so the live edge is on the outside. Well, on the
Okay.
inside where you would join together is a cut flat edge. So I mean, it doesn't have to be, it depends on how they've cut the wood, but what they'll do is in the void in the middle, they pour epoxy,
Uh,
and it'll meander through the middle of the table, and they call it a river table. And so what we've done is I've found a really beautiful several beautiful slabs to build the table. It's made out of Bodark wood, Osage orange,
okay.
and that is a very hard wood. A lot of duck call makers make their duck calls out of it. Turkey, guys make their strikers out of it,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. But it's typically doesn't get that big. So there was a tree from a guy really just not very far from where I live right now in Bald Knob that had a tornado came through a few weeks ago or about a month or so ago, and it knocked the tree over. And so a friend of mine that has a sawmill got his hands on the tree,
Uh-huh.
cut the slabs, and he says, "Man, this will make a beautiful table or a countertop or something." And so I got my hands on it and got him to a guy that I know that builds river tables, and
Uh-huh.
he's going to build the river table. So I'm going to be shooting some video
Oh, that's
of the
awesome.
process of him building it. So I'm excited about that. But it's 19 and a half feet long.
Ooh, big table.
And it will seat about 22 people because that's really what we need. We'll
Yep.
have our guests of, 12 or 14 or whatever
Hmm.
people, and myself, my wife, maybe a guest or two,
Yep.
maybe a staff member or two, that sort of thing. And so that's what we need to have in the lot. So that'll be also in the great room.
Uh-huh.
And then we've got a game room that'll have pool table, that sort of thing, some big TVs, a bar area. So there's a lot of nice places where you can be loud and
Hmm.
yell at the game, and then there's some quiet areas where you can get away and read a book. We've got a small little library, and that sort of thing. We have a commercial kitchen, so we'll have be legit to with all the things that a commercial kitchen has,
Hmm.
a good kitchen staff, chef, that sort of thing. And then my family will also be living at the lodge year round as well to make sure everything is safe and we can handle things immediately and
Yep.
be a lot more convenient, of course, for us too.
And then there's also another building pretty close by the where the guides are at and storage. Just talk about that real quickly too.
Yep, yep. We have a shop building that is 6,000 square feet that has a I guess a living quarters that's got 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room. It's really very, very nice.
Hmm.
And so that will I said this before, it's probably going to be the nicest guide quarters in any duck club in the state of Arkansas.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not extravagant by any means. It's just nice. I
Yep.
mean, most people would live there.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
that nice. And so that'll be good to just have some guys on site all the time and don't, typically with duck hunting, it's a seasonal business for the guides. We
Hmm.
will likely have, probably one full-time person at least that will work and do other things and help out around the place.
Hmm.
But for the time being, we'll at least have a couple, three part-time guides that will be here, just during the season. A lot of them will travel from a long way off, and therefore if they don't live in town, they're going to want to have a place to stay. So that's what we'll use it for. But it's really nice. And then we'll keep, in the shop part, the back side of that particular building is all shop space, so we can put tractors, side by sides. Boats, all the
Hmm.
decoys, all that kind of stuff is lots and lots of room for that.
So the big question on the lodge, which I've only asked you about 1,000 times, when's this thing going to get done?
That's a great question. The drop dead date was, I think, November the 1st,
Hmm.
and that was like, I mean, I don't even know how we could pull it together if we were
Yeah.
moving in on November the 1st. But that was, you got to give a drop dead date, and we
Yep.
could still make duck season happen. Duck season opens, I think, around the 20th ish sometime. That give us about 3 weeks to get it in. But they are assuring me that we're going to be well ahead of that. The plan really has always been to be in, sometime in September,
Yep.
and there's no reason to think it's not going to be that. I've heard them throw around some earlier dates. I'm not gonna mess things up by saying what that might be, but we'll be excited if we can get in by Labor Day. I'll be thrilled to death. That'll give us a lot of time to get things exactly what we want in there, the
Absolutely.
decorations done and all that.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see it get completed. I know the update pictures and videos have been exciting to see as it's been going along. I hope everybody, again, if you're listening, make sure to check out the video portion of this because we're going to put some updated pictures and so forth in there. On the hunting, when you were talking guides, explain the dog policy at the lodge and then the guides having their own dogs and so forth. Just explain that because we do get a ton of questions on that part.
Yeah. Yeah. We all the guides have dogs, and we that's kind of our policy is to, you only use the dogs from the guides. We don't allow customers to bring dogs.
Hmm.
It's, the thing is most of the time when I have guided people in the past that brought their dog, most of the time the guys that do bring their dogs, they're wanting to use it for a training experience.
Hmm.
And that may be fine if you're a solo hunter, but the rest of the guys in the blind don't appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
And it tends to be kind of a negative experience for everybody. But our dogs know the property, they know where everything is. They know the game, and a lot of the places that we hunt are kind of unusual.
Hmm.
I have two dogs myself. I've got a young dog that's about two, and then I've got an older dog that's very seasoned. She's 7.5, so she'll be 8
Yeah.
in December, and she's seen it all. And when I choose which dog I'm going to take with me for the day, I've got my big girl blinds,
Yep.
for the mature dog that needs to be that one.
Yep.
And then I've got my younger dog will be fine here,
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, that's the thing is there's a lot of the places I have that I'm not going to take an inexperienced dog because it slows the hunt down
Hmm.
and everybody wants to get their limit. But
Hmm.
if we're spending lots and lots of time chasing ducks because the dog is not able to do what's required,
Yep.
and it's a lot different. What we have is not a rice field that has 12 inches of water on it. That's
Hmm.
you can see everything.
Yep.
It's not an open water situation where the dog can see every bird.
Yep.
That's the habitat has got a lot of cover, and I would say 75% of the dog sends are going to be blinds,
Hmm.
blind retrieves, meaning I got to use hand signals to direct the dog to where it goes. Unless the dog is really good, it can mark all the birds, but I'm still having to handle the dog. And it just, most people's dog, as much as they go, especially guys that don't hunt every
Yep.
day or hunt 3 or 4 times a
Hmm.
week,
Hmm.
it's just a big difference. And I don't ever like to down somebody else's dog. I mean, it's like down to somebody's wife. I mean, you just don't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody loves their dog. I love my dogs, and sometimes my dogs have bad days.
Yep.
Everybody's dog has bad days,
Yep.
but we're trying to bring the best experience possible. And if you really want to hunt with your dog, we're not going to be the place you're going to want to come because, and I get that. I
Yep.
wouldn't want to go without my dog,
Yep.
but that's not what we do here.
Yeah, no, I completely get it. I've bird hunted all over the place and hunted places to where you can bring your dog, hunted places to where they have the policy of just use our dogs and so forth. And there's a difference between a dog that hunts for 60 days a year on the property and will retrieve thousands of ducks versus, at certain points in my life, I had a lab that was phenomenal, right? But I'd only get out 8 to 10 days a year. So he's retrieving 50 to 60 ducks, right? Not
Right,
that
right,
completely different than a dog that's retrieved 2,500 in a season, right? So
right.
that's what we
Exactly.
want our clients to come here and have a great time and not have to worry about the dog. Because a lot of times when the ducks come, it's a 15-minute flurry, right? And you got to be able to get the ducks back in and not have a dog and wandering and so forth. So we just want it to go flawless from that standpoint. Um, so favorite question that I like to ask, and you probably get asked a lot, right? Decoys. So a lot of places on the blinds will leave decoys out and I've hunted over places that have, 600 decoys set. We've got motions, we got spinners, we got every single thing that you could think about out in front. And then I've hunted over a place actually with you, right? That we shot very good and we had 4 or 6 decoys out. So explain the process of how many decoys I'm going to use. And this is a good one for anybody that's going to hunt here to listen to, because for people that don't hunt a lot, they think, man, the more decoys, the better. Not necessarily the truth.
Not necessarily the truth. Yeah, that's right. I had a guy that was one of my early mentors in duck hunting that he had a big farm. Actually, it's only about 30 minutes from here. And he taught me a lot about decoys. I was probably 18, 19 years old. I started hunting with him a little bit, and he brought out 6 decoys one day. And I'm like, what? Did I need to bring some decoys?
Uh-huh.
Oh no, we'll be fine. And we pitched out 6 decoys and killed our limit in like 15 or 20 minutes, and it was done. We were on the way back to the house, and it just that blew my mind, and I learned a very valuable thing at that point. Of course, I'll even back up. My very first duck hunt I ever went on in my entire life, I didn't have a decoy one,
Mm-hmm.
not one decoy. In fact, I didn't have, and of course, I was going with a buddy who knew something about duck hunting. I knew nothing about duck
Uh-huh.
hunting. He had no decoys and he didn't have a duck call. He just went to the right place
Yep.
and we stood next to a tree. And I actually hunted for that entire season that exact same way and killed lots of ducks.
Hmm.
So it's, location, location, location is really important.
Hmm.
Number two, my personal opinion is ducks come to the call more than they come to a decoy.
Hmm.
Decoys are to direct the ducks to an exact spot.
Yep.
And so I can manipulate ducks by the way I set my decoys up and either make them land right here or keep them from landing in a certain spot. You want to get them right in front of your gun barrel, right in front of your
Hmm.
duck blind. And so doing that I think, is confidence and getting them to stop in that spot. And so we use motion decoys, whether it's spinners or the little butt ups that move
Hmm.
around, or all the different millions of different motion decoys that are out there to bring confidence that these are really ducks out. The more duck decoys you put out, the more motion you have to put
Yep.
out.
Yep.
So in Arkansas, we have almost no wind a lot of days. And it
Hmm.
seems crazy that the wind blows from February 1st until Thanksgiving. I mean, it was blowing 20 miles an hour yesterday. And we always
Uh-huh.
talk about, man, why does the wind get turned on? But why do you want wind? We want wind because it makes the decoys move around. It makes it look natural,
Yep.
and you don't want a bunch of statues. So when people ask me how many decoys do I use as many decoys as I can keep moving.
Hmm.
And so if it's a flat day, I know the weatherman says it's going to be a light and variable wind. I put out less decoys
Uh-huh.
unless I've got a lot of movement. So that's number one. What's average? I do not leave decoys out, and I pick them up every day.
Okay.
Very rarely do I ever leave decoys out, and I don't use big spreads. Occasionally I do. Most of the time it's 6 dozen decoys or less. Common is 4 or 5 dozen. That's
Yep.
pretty common what I normally do. And the later in the season it gets, the less decoys I use because they're decoy shy. They've been beat up for 4 or 5 months.
They've been shot at from Saskatchewan all the way down. Yep.
Right.
Yep. No, that's and I always hear, especially when sending people on waterfowl hunts in the U.S., in Canada specifically, of what do the decoys look like in Canada early season. I mean, especially for geese, they put out these giant spreads, right? But it's the
Mhm.
first time these geese have seen spreads, so they just come right to it. And truthfully, I've always hunted over big spreads until I hunted with you down there, and we had so much success over the small spread. And then it
Mhm.
gets you thinking, right? As a hunter, anything you do, you got to get better the next time you go out. And then I start thinking about what I've done in Michigan, and I was like, man, some of the better hunts I've done here has been when I've been in a hurry and I've grabbed six, and you toss them out like 5 minutes before legal shooting, and then all of a sudden you have a good day with a small spread versus the days you get up hours early.
Right.
But the big part of a small spread, as soon as you're done, it's a heck of a lot easier to pick up. You don't got to spend an hour doing it and getting back, and it's the big
Yeah.
one.
Well, and the type of, what we do differently, at least where I hunt, uh, I'm like waist deep or knee deep or 12 inches deep.
Hmm.
And so we use Texas rigs. It's super quick to pick up and throw out decoys. A lot of guys throughout the rest of the country, they're hunting, water over your head,
Yeah.
sometimes even deeper. And so then they're having to deal with a lot of decoy cord and all that. So I mean,
Hmm.
that definitely impacts, how much time it takes you to put and take up decoys.
100%. So I know you're a guy that's always busy working on projects. Like I heard you mention one about doing the table and videoing that. What have you been up to lately, and what do you have planned for on your channel, Surviving Duck Season?
My channel, Surviving Duck Season, I think my regular viewers are frustrated with me because I've been so busy for the last few months. I
Uh,
haven't put any videos out. We have been shooting a lot of stuff, but we just haven't. I haven't had time to get some things edited. I actually was shooting some stuff yesterday, and we're trying to finish up a video right now that I did with Jimmy Muller, who is the choke tube king,
mhm,
and it's a video about shooting and
mhm,
being a better shooter. He's a competition sporting clays guy. He's won tons and tons of competitions, and he's a great instructor. And as much experience as I have shooting a duck,
Mm-hmm.
I still have a lot to learn about shooting. I feel like I'm a good shot, but when you got a guy that has made his living off of shooting a shotgun, he's got a lot to share, and so that's what that video is about. I'm hoping we're going to get that thing finished up this week and get that released maybe next week. But we've got a few videos on shotgunning. I know that's been a very popular thing that
Mm-hmm.
we've been doing on surviving duck season in the last several years. So we've got several more of those coming out in the next few months, and then of course I'll be doing some habitat videos. Of course, my habitat stuff has been a little slow to start this year
Yeah.
because of the rain and weather, but that's something that has been very, very popular as well on the channel, as guys just learning about what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
planting and then manipulating the habitat for the wildlife. So we'll be doing several of those in the next couple of months as well.
So on the shotgun, if
Mhm.
you get a client that calls you and says, Joel, what do I need to have? And it's a clean slate. This guy's like, tell me what shotgun, what choke, what shells to use, what all the way down. What are you going to explain to him to say, hey, if I had the ideal setup, this is what I'm come to Arkansas and bring this.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions that I'm going to ask them
Mm-hmm.
because, the choice of a shotgun and ammo and choke tube is, it's a very specific thing for what you're going to hunt and where
Mm-hmm.
you're going to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
You're coming to Arkansas, my advice is going to be, you can totally get away with a 20 gauge or even a 28 gauge if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I shoot. I've been shooting sub gauges for, I don't know, the last 6 or 7 years as my regular everyday shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the last two duck seasons, I've been shooting a 28 gauge every day, whether I'm shooting geese or ducks, doesn't matter, any distance. I have no worries that I'm going to be able to outshoot even every person that's in the blind with me. I've got
Mm-hmm.
a lot of confidence in what I'm shooting. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to shoot 28 gauge, but it's possible. And it's not. You don't have to be a professional to do
Yep.
it.
Yep.
But 12 gauge or 20 gauge is what I'm going to suggest for the average person. You can definitely get away with either one if you're willing to spend the extra money to get something other than steel shot
Mm-hmm.
to shoot out of your shotgun. Because if you can go to bismuth or to some type of tungsten blend or TSS, you will be able to shoot smaller shot size than you do with steel shot,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore you won't need to shoot as big of a bore gun, and you can still shoot at long distances. In fact, even longer distances than you would be with steel shot. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the benefit. Now, if you're going to shoot steel shot, I'm definitely not going to suggest you shoot a 28 gauge. You can still shoot some steel shot at certain distances with a
Mm-hmm.
20 gauge. But my choice is bismuth. Although with some of the things going on with the supply chain
Yeah.
deal, it may be more difficult moving forward to be able to do that. But at least for the next year or so, we're good here with ample supply of bismuth ammunition that we've purchased from Boss Shot Shells,
Yep.
and we provide that for our people that hunt with us. So if you come hunt with me, you don't need to worry about shotgun shells. Excuse me.
Yep.
But a shotgun, excuse me, that's capable, you're going to be shooting 40 yards and inside on an average day. If you're
Mm-hmm.
in the woods, you're going to be shooting less. We have a sub gauge only policy in our woods, so it's going to be a 28 gauge or a 20 gauge anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to what kind of gun should I buy, that's going to be a personal preference. My suggestion to you is, if you have a friend that has a gun that he likes, that's going to be the first step.
Yep.
Is, if he's got a Benelli something or another, he's got a Winchester something or another,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, then go to a store or take his gun,
Yep.
shoulder it, see what it feels like. If it feels like it fits you well, then that's because it's all about fit.
Yep.
At the end of the day, it's all about fit. There are lots of really great guns
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people like, but I don't like them for me because they don't fit me.
Yep.
And you got to do a lot of monkeying around with a gun to get them to fit you. So you're better off finding a gun that almost fits you and then fix it rather than trying to get something that just feels too big in your hands or too small in your hands and then try to work with it. I know a lot of guys have hand-me-down guns,
Yep.
and you can definitely make that work. Most guys, especially guys that grew up hunting,
Yep.
that's what they got. That's what they got. They got dad's gun,
Yep.
or whatever. But that's not necessarily the best way to go. If you can buy your own gun, buy one that fits you. And I've got a video out on my surviving duck season that tells you all about that. But that's what I would suggest is go to a pawn shop, go to a sporting goods store, hold some guns, feel what they feel like in your hands, shoulder them, see if they naturally come to, fitting you the right way. A guy at a sporting goods store that is got a really good gun department is going to know what it looks like to fit
Yep.
you properly, and that's my best suggestion. We have M2 Benellis and a few Super Black Eagle Benellis that we do provide for some guys that don't have a gun or don't want to fly with a gun. Those are good guns. I have the Ethos Cordoba, which is also a Benelli that I use as a 28 gauge. I like it a lot. I also have a couple of Winchesters that I really like a lot. The SX4, I've got those in 12 gauge and 20 gauge that I've been shooting for a long time. A Winchester, a Remington 870 is a great gun, but it will kick a lot.
It will kick a lot.
And so mine sits in the closet because I don't shoot it anymore. But they're great guns, and so some people like to shoot a pump. A BPS Browning is a great pump gun that a lot of shotgunners, a lot of duck hunters use. It's a good gun. So there's a lot of guns that have a history of hanging up a lot. And so I would say do your research online to see what those are. If you like to shoot an auto loader, there's a lot of them that you might want to steer away from. A lot of Me Too type new gun companies that have their guns being made overseas or kind of fall into that category. I'm not going to name a bunch of names, but you might want to avoid some of those because they don't have the quality control that some of the American brands or some of the higher end European brands have.
Yep. Now, question for you: when you're shooting, are you somebody that looks down the barrel, or are you an instinct shooter?
Well, I'm an instinct shooter. I do look down the barrel, but I'm not an aimer. I don't aim.
Yep.
It's a shotgun is not, unless you're using it as a slug gun or a turkey gun kind of thing, you're not aiming.
Yep.
If you're a wing shooter or you're a target, clay target shooter, you've really got to be an instinctual shooter, and you got to follow the bird and shoot where he's going, not where he's been.
Yep. 100%. And that's where I feel fortunate because my dad started me as a woodcock hunter here in Michigan, which has to be the trickiest upland bird to try to hit. Slowest flying bird, but the trickiest to hit. So I was instinct from the time I was born, good and bad, because now in a lot of my travel I use shotguns on game animals too, like brocket deer hunting and so forth. We just did a blue diker hunt in South Africa, same thing, using a shotgun. The problem with that is as soon as I get the shotgun, I go instinct shooting, even on deer and so forth, which isn't quite as good as wing shooting. But it's always interesting. I've been in the blinds for some early waterfowl hunters experiences, right? And they use that bead and you can see them, you're like, oh, you're aiming too much. And that the times I've gotten in trouble has been that too, is you see this mallard coming from the sky and it seems like you got all day, and now you're sitting there and you're with the bead on it, and that's when you shoot and you're like, oh no. And the aiming will get you.
The on this video that we're working on, that I was just talking about with Jimmy and myself, he has a great comment kind of about that, and he says, here's the deal: you want to be able to see your target for as long as you can see it and kill him in your mind before you pull the trigger. And that's the thing that that says a lot when you think about it, when you put it into practice. He said you're doing the same thing when you're shooting clay targets. See it as long as you can, and you're following with your eyes as you're raising your gun up to shoot, but you're killing it almost before you even get the gun up to your shoulder. And that's rather than, you're not ambush shooting it. You're not like picking a hole. A lot of guys do that. They'll pick a hole and wait till he gets to the hole and pull the trigger, and you're shooting behind him every time when you do that.
Yep. What's your toughest shot? If you see a duck coming from one certain angle, what's your toughest?
Oh, it's crossing.
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
it's a right to left crossing shot for me is always the toughest,
Yep.
and that's where we kind of parked on the day that we did the video with Jimmy. Is we worked on that, and he really helped me out. Most people don't lead nearly as much as they're supposed to,
That's what I was going to
and
say. When's the last time you shot in front of a duck flying left to right? You never do.
yeah,
You never
no.
do. You never do. That's where everybody always asks when you make a good shot or something in the blind, you're like, how far are you leading? And I always take, like, in your mind, you're doing it in nanoseconds, right? Like, I got to get farther ahead, because then I try to do that same line. When's the last time I've ever shot in front of a duck? And usually when you make that little bit of adjustment to get farther ahead, that's when you make those, what I consider great shots when you're in the blind, where guys will turn and give you the, hey, that was a great shot.
I'll tell you a funny story. I just happened to think about it. I don't know if that's something you'd want on the video or not, but right outside the window here in our backyard, we have a cookhouse. It's just a
Okay.
little building that's got a chimney on it. And we, I was sitting on the phone. I was sitting here at my desk on the phone the other day. That's Friday. And as a duck hunter, I'm like daydreaming duck hunting like
Yeah, the
24/7.
rest until it gets to the season.
And so I'm looking out, and we've got these great big giant old, trees that are huge. And I'm like, just I don't know, you look out there and you like seeing a duck coming in the trees.
Uh-huh.
And I saw a duck come in the trees. I'm not kidding. It landed on the chimney of my grill house. And
Really?
we're in a neighborhood. We are in a neighborhood. We are
Uh-huh.
not out in the middle of nowhere. There's not a lake or a pond or a stream nearby. And a wood duck landed on the dang chimney. And I'm like, is that what I think it
Am
is?
I daydreaming here? What's going
Yeah.
on?
And so I'm like, I'm hollering for my daughter. And
Uh-huh.
like, I'm like, Hadley, come here, come here. And she comes in and I said, is that a duck? She said, that's a wood duck. She's 6. She knows what a wood duck is.
Yeah.
She said, that's a wood duck. I said, yeah, it's a Drake wood duck. And we shot a little bit of video on the phone with it. And then it jumped up in a tree and it sat on a branch. And I'm like, that's weird. Why is a duck doing that?
Yeah.
The next day, I had to go out to the grill house. Guess what was inside the grill house? A hen wood duck.
Oh, no way. That's where she was
And
nesting.
she actually was either nesting in the vinahood thingy
Uh-huh.
or in the chimney, and then somehow crawled inside and got stuck inside. And there was an egg on the floor.
Wow.
And I put it in an incubator thing or a heat lamp, and then
Yeah.
I got it to a friend of mine that's got an incubator. But I haven't found the nest yet, but it's probably in the chimney, and I can't get in there to look at it.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen her again yet either. She's probably just sneaky, and I'm not seeing her. But it's pretty fun. I
That
mean,
is
it's like,
funny. That's funny. That anybody that's listening though, that's Arkansas right there. You never know where you're going to see a duck.
yeah. Well, I'm glad to know that I can attract ducks even in the springtime, sitting in my office.
There you go. So, anybody that's listening, Joel, Surviving Duck Season, your YouTube channel, also on social media. Obviously, anybody listening to this is probably a waterfowl hunter interested. Joel, in my opinion, hands down, probably the best educational videos of anything waterfowl. If it's setting decoys, if it's calling, if it's shotgun shells, if it's shotguns, anything for somebody just looking for more information or especially getting into the hobby of waterfowl hunting, you got to check out Joel's stuff. Joel, you're one of the guys that I look at as moving the industry through, right? Because in hunting, there's a lot of the times of I close the door, I don't want anybody else to come in behind me, and you do a great job of educating to make it easier for people to get into waterfowl hunting. It's a tricky, right? Well, getting into anything hunting wise or anything in life that's brand new is tricky. So educational videos like you're doing really help people.
Thanks. Yeah, it's very difficult to navigate all the stuff that there's so many people that I mean I've got lots of comments from viewers that thank me for what we do,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, I'm 40 something years old and I've got a kid that they want to start duck hunting. I've never duck hunted. I don't know what to do.
Yep.
Or it may be a 20-year-old, young man that's just been duck hunting for a year or so and he's trying to figure out how to do it on his own because he didn't have a dad that did it.
Yep.
And that's what we're trying to fill that void of the mentor that they didn't have.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you also got some of the habitat videos you're doing on your channel that are from Lost Bridge Duck Club. Anybody that's listening and that wants more information on Lost Bridge, where do they need to go?
lostbridgeduckclub.com. We have our website there that kind of gives you, all the information about coming duck hunting with us and all of that. We have a Instagram account for that as well. And then we, of course, I'm doing some updates and whatnot on surviving duck season on all of our social media there too.
Perfect. Joel, thank you for your time today. It's always great catching up. Hopefully things dry out down there in the next couple of weeks. You can get out and get some work done.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me be with you.